and Planning. Appreciate everyone being here. Please be advised that this meeting is being broadcast over the internet. We get to warn that to everybody, seems like every single meeting that we have, but I guess it means we've got to behave. So agenda item 2 is consideration of approval of the minutes from the September 24th, 2014 committee meeting. Any questions or discussion for the minutes?
Move approval.
Have a motion?
Second.
And a second. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Passes. Agenda item 3 is consideration of approval of the consent calendar. Agenda 5B, the facilities audit report, and item 5F1, the rule on TEG, are on the consent calendar. Are there any agenda items that anyone wants to remove from the consent calendar? Anybody? All right. Then we'll have a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Moved.
And a second? And a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Passes. Agenda item number 4 is public testimony on items relating to the Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning. We do have public testimony for item 5F3. The testimony will be taken after the item has been presented to the committee. We kind of moved that to that point. So agenda item 5A is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to Texas Workforce Planning Study addressing the state's projected workforce needs for training and education, House Bill 1296, 83rd Texas Legislature regular session. The draft report was sent to you under separate cover. Charles Goldman with the RAND Corporation will provide an update. Charles, as always, welcome. Glad you're here. We were saying earlier that we're going to make you an honorary Texan for as many times as you've come to visit with us.
Thank you.
So we're glad you're here.
I'm honored to be with you again. And I have with us today Linda Head and Michael Bettersworth. Welcome to come up while I'm giving you my quick update. At your last committee meeting, we had a briefing and a discussion of the report. Since that time, we've circulated the report for public comment. We received 4 comments during the public comment period. And we also submitted the report for technical review, which is part of RAND's quality assurance process. We received 2 technical reviews, and we provided, I think in your packet, 2 or 3 page summary of the main comments we received and how we addressed them in the report. The comments generally were supportive of what we'd done in the study. Many of them also made specific suggestions about other points we could make. One of the common themes was that there are a lot of weaknesses in the existing data sources and that we should be a little bit more forthright in the report about saying that there are weaknesses and challenges in using these, and so it's important not to rely on only one source of data and to be aware of those limitations, look at multiple sources of data. So we've tried to bring that theme out a little bit more in the report. We've updated all the data files. The TWC has released new projections covering the 2012 to 2022 time frame, and so we updated all the data outputs in the report and in the supplementary files to reflect that. We provided all those to the coordinating board. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
David.
Thank you very much for your important report here. What exactly are the weaknesses that are alleged in the data sources, and what kind of measures can be taken to strengthen data sources in the future? And I'm looking at this mainly as a point of how do we make recommendations to the legislature to provide better data so that we can be more accurate in our modeling and our predictions?
Okay. Well, that's an excellent question, and some of the weaknesses in data sources, I think, are inherent in the nature of collecting large-scale statistical data. It takes time to collect it, so by the time you get the data, it's always going to be somewhat out of date. And I think that's difficult to deal with. Some of the newer sources of online job postings, like we talked in the report about Burning Glass and EMSI, provide a complementary way of looking at labor market demands that's more up to date. So I'm not sure in most cases it's necessarily that we're going to have a fix where we can improve all these, but it's more that we want to look at each data source for what information it contributes combined with others. Now, there are some specific areas that I think we could do better. Coordinating board staff was just telling me that there's going to be a recommendation in the TWC Sunset Review that they begin collecting detailed information on occupations of workers as part of their data series. Because right now, when you get the primary unemployment records don't show you the occupation of the workers. You just find out about work location and maybe general industry. And so if that is implemented, that would significantly improve the information that would be available to look at labor market by occupation.
Is there another state that does it better, or is this a pervasive problem just with the data and the modeling and dated data?
For the most part, most of the states do things the same way. They're fairly common. I do understand. Susan Brown was just saying that there are some other states that have begun to move in this direction about getting better detail on occupation, and so that seems to be a trend that Texas could potentially pick up on.
Are there any other questions of Charles? And let me go ahead and introduce, I apologize. Linda Head is the Associate Vice Chancellor of Workforce Education and Corporate Partnerships at Lone Star College System. And Michael Bettersworth is the Vice Chancellor, Chief Policy Officer, and Executive Director at Texas State Technical Colleges. And each will provide information on how their colleges are using the workforce data. So y'all want to go ahead and move into that?
Absolutely. Linda?
And then let me just say this. After we vote on the draft report, Rex Peoples and Susan Brown will present the staff recommendations for discussion purposes only. These recommendations will be distributed for comment before the vote is taken at the January board meeting. So that's kind of the flow of what we'll have. So let y'all go ahead. Thank you.
All right, I'm half Italian, so I have a hard time sitting and speaking at the same time. But
you're free to jump up and move around.
I can jump up, move my hands, as best I can. I'm honored to be here, and thank you, Charles, for inviting me to do so. We played a part in the. We were interviewed for the research that the Rayon Corporation conducted, and we're happy to give our 2 cents on what we're doing at Lone Star, and have been for about 6 years. You know Richard Carpenter, who was our chancellor, and when he started 7 years ago, he tasked me to develop a department that brought together credit, non-credit, and corporate training into one umbrella, and to develop our programs and services together as one unit. And I was a college professor at one point, an academic chair, dean, and then created a continuing education and then our corporate college, which is our corporate training area. And now I actually begged to have job placement reporting to us so we could help with that, because none of this is worth a flip if we don't get students jobs. So that's what we're going to talk about. If you're familiar with Lone Star College, we have 6 colleges with 6 college presidents. Makes our work sometimes very difficult because they're all very strong, educated, and opinionated, and they all know what program they want. And when the chancellor comes and says, "Okay, why don't we have a program in nanotechnology?" or someone at a small executive airport says to a president, "I want a pilot program." Someone else wants a recording studio. It's my department's job to say yes or no in terms of a recommendation based on data and based on our research. Our enrollment is somewhere in the 80,000s. Adding to the complexity, we have lots of students. We serve a large community. Sometimes the smaller colleges feel that we have it easy because we have lots of financial resources, but we have it very difficult to get anything done because we have 6,100 employees and a large service area. And within our service area, we have multiple cities. We're part of the greater Houston area, but yet we have the city of Tomball, the city of Humble, the city of Conroe, the Woodlands, which thinks we're a city, and all those kinds of dynamics going on. We presented a master plan based on our workforce research to our Board of Trustees and realized that where we needed to start was with a clear definition of workforce education. Some of this is out of the new GIPWE that we've worked closely with Gary Tomerlin on, but we had to get down to nuts and bolts. What do we mean when we say workforce education? Because people have in their heads something different, and the businesses, the employers, have something very different. You talk to one person, they think it's workforce development is GED. Someone else thinks it's welding. So we had to explain terminology so we would all start at the same place. We use the high school term CTE for our non-credit fast-track certificates, which we have about 40 of them. Again, because it's all under one process, non-credit can't create a program of study without going through our workforce council, just like credit can't, just like corporate training has to determine their focus based on our data. Workforce education are our credit level 1, level 2 certs and AAS degrees. Corporate college is our customized training. The class will have students from one company versus open enrollment for anyone to join. And then, of course, industry certification tests and test prep. This is our process in a picture. It's taken us 6 years to develop a 110-page manual that describes our process for each of the 10 steps, and we have a form that everyone has to use along with it. And number 1 starts with program requests. Anyone can submit a program request. My next-door neighbor, my husband, the college presidents, the deans, but the presidents have to sign off on the fact that from their colleges come these requests. And then System Office, which is me, our department also has our own list of programs to develop, and it's not just new programs, it's modification of our programs. So we are continuously modifying. Again, I was a professor. I was a dean over curriculum teams. We don't want to wait for an instructor to decide that information technology needs to be updated. Because when we do that, it may or may not get updated in a way that is fast enough for the change in business and the technologies in business. The second part is the labor market analysis. Everything in the navy blue is research. So before we start creating programs, modeling programs, revising programs, doing anything, we together as a team are using research. We have a 50-member workforce council. Everyone thinks we're nuts to start it with 50 people, but we had to have good faculty representation. So we have 30 faculty on this workforce council, and then we have every other department: marketing, grants, student services, of course, academic affairs, small business development center, corporate training, continuing ed, all, and 12 deans, 8 deans on this council. And we meet monthly, and the council reviews the progress made on all programs of study as we're developing and modifying them. Most recently, coming to the we've had diesel technology. We're working right now on process technology. And who would think that Lone Star, which is more on the central and north side of town, would be worrying about putting employees into the ExxonMobil plant in Baytown? But ExxonMobil needs all of us in the Gulf Coast area to develop their workforce because the needs are so huge. So we are proposing a process technology program. Every month we have programs, either major modifications or new, and major modification is change more than 25% to the program. We also then have intense focus groups. We bring high-level people. We've clustered our programs of study into focus groups into 4 different areas: accounting and business, computer information technology, energy and manufacturing, healthcare. And we bring them together at a high level to talk about jobs. But before we do that, we pull the research. And as Charles mentioned, we use Burning Glass to get real-time labor market analysis. We've been working with this company. I don't get any kickback from them. I'm not a salesperson for them. But we've been using this tool for about 4 years now. We were actually a beta for them. They came out of Jobs for the Future, if you're familiar with them. Because we needed real-time today. Where are the jobs today? And more than that, we needed to have some more detailed information. I'm going to show you in just a minute. We also use the MSI data because they sometimes pull some different types of information. And of course, Rich Frischel is a good professional friend, and we use TWC data and Department of Labor, because just one data source is not enough, because you're going to get a little bit different picture from each. Then we pull together that focus group. Then we get down into something that used to be called a PCAL. And a gentleman that passed away a couple of years ago that worked at Richland College was in the armed services as a trainer and program developer. And he taught all of us a process where you can get down into the real tasks: technical skills, soft skills, equipment needs, and it doesn't take as long as a DACM. We threw DACM out about 7 years ago. And it's just too slow and cumbersome, and you don't get the level of detail that we need to really develop curriculum in a fast, consistent way. And then we have a business plan. We submitted 2 business plans we presented to our Chancellor's Cabinet last week. And the business plan is very comprehensive. We give a true financial picture. We estimate the coordinating board contact hours, revenue, tuition. We include the equipment, how much the equipment is going to cost over a 4-year period, faculty, professional development, marketing, a whole total picture of what it's going to cost us. Some things don't make money, like nursing. It's never going to make us money. But we give the picture to show that it's never going to cover its costs, ever. So, and some of these high-tech oil and gas programs are not going to cover their costs. So we have to make sure that our CFO is figuring out, if we put in zillions of English and you have a little bit of nursing, and how we will be able to be financially stable as an institution. Then it goes to the faculty to fine-tune the curriculum, and we also, through Workforce Council, help market the program. We develop the website, the SLICs, and we take all the data that we've gathered all along the way to help market the program, recruit students, and recruit instructors, because the hardest thing to find, it's not the students, it's the instructors. And we work with HR to develop comprehensive recruitment strategies. Program begins, and this year we've piloted our new program evaluation process, both an annual quantitative with 18 data elements program review, and then a 4-year qualitative and quantitative process that's very succinct, and it seems to be working for Lone Star. Here's Rich Frischel's data. So we get the big picture, where are the jobs? And I love to show this to our board, because we can see nursing's in the top 5, and so is truck driving. And we use this data. It's important data. We need to know in Texas where the jobs are and what they pay. And gainful employment numbers are very close to these, and of course we have to report those for financial aid, and we are doing a heck of a job now reporting our gainful employment, so the community knows that truck driving only takes you 6 weeks to get a credential, and nursing takes you 2 years, and it's probably easier to get into the truck driving program, and it's easier to find a job. And we're talking about those things with our communities. Here's a sample of our Burning Glass data. What we love about this is, again, rather than using traditional methods of gathering technical skills, soft skills, putting up flip charts, asking people in the room what they are, we do that ahead of time. So we have all the data polled. We have 2 labor market analysts in our department, and they poll the job titles and the companies that are employing those students. So here you go. Here's the companies employing those students. We know that now. So that helps us with corporate training, and it more importantly helps us with job placement. If they have the jobs posted, we now have business consultants in job placement and to supplement the career services counselors at the campuses. And because of the data, we now can go to them and invite them to come interview our students. Then we get into the skills. So we poll the technical skills, the soft skills, and what the Burning Glass calls the foundational skills, which are really soft skills, and the industry certifications that are required. So we are adding industry certification to every program where there is one. The faculty weren't originally excited about that, but now all of our machining faculty are NIM certified, welding, AWS certified. You know, we've done it with Cisco and Microsoft for years. We have not been doing it in some of our skilled trades areas. So now we are, so we're sure our faculty stay updated and we're offering the best programs. And so that our students have both the Lone Star credential and an industry credential. We have a list of about 32 soft skills. They're the same for every job, just tweaked a little bit. So we don't have to have that conversation every time and spend too much time, because the data shows us that here are the soft skills. The customer service is needed whether you're a service repair guy on an oil rig out in the field or whether you're a nurse. But it's just tweaked a little bit for those different occupations. We've also, of course, have high-level advisory councils for the chancellor, because we need the buy-in from the executives at the top. So now that Burning Glass and others have given us the companies, we seek them out. We develop high-level advisory councils, because we don't want to just have the 5 or 6 that show up sometimes at our program advisory councils. We need the big dogs. And so every quarter, we pull in around 30 organizations that give us our executives information so that they understand. With all due respect, most of our presidents have PhDs in history, English, higher ed administration, not in business. And most of them have never worked in business. So what this has done for our leadership team is have them meeting with business executives regularly. And then program evaluation. I was faculty. I sort of know the head of a faculty, so we're careful about how we present this data, but it's data. And we want them to look at the data and not be scared by the data. If a program is not growing, it doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean they're doing something wrong. It could mean we haven't effectively marketed that program. It could mean we chose the wrong title. Maybe we got all caught up on whether it should be mechatronics or engineering technology or field service technician, or maybe the business doesn't know what that program is. Maybe the student doesn't know. And this is really not a project that we did one time. It's been a whole culture change for our institution. And in closing, a few weeks ago at the November election, our community approved a $485 million bond. The premise for that bond was workforce education and 4 new centers of excellence based on our work through our Workforce Council and our Office for Workforce Education and Corporate Partnerships. A new center for process and lab technologies, a new center for truck driving and logistics, a new center for computer information technology and visual communications, and a new center for industrial and commercial construction, not home construction. Also a testing center so that we can invite the community and our students to continuously update their skills and take those certifications that are depicted in our research.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thanks very much for showing us about the Lone Star process. We were impressed in the course of the research with what Lone Star had put together, and we thought it was worth highlighting and ultimately perhaps sharing good practices at Lone Star and at other Texas institutions more widely with other institutions.
Oh, might I mention one last thing? Yesterday, at the International Association of Drilling Contractors meeting, we developed a international program of study together for a floor hand roustabout. It's taken us 3 years to do it because we've brought in employers first who developed this knowledge, skills, and abilities for 64 occupations in the oil and gas industries, including marine, manufacturing, service and repair, and drilling. And we're very excited that we now have the skills and competencies that any of us can use for a floor hand roustabout. And then we also develop the pre-assessments, and the assessments, including physical abilities, drug testing, and the like. And we use the same process to do that.
Thank you, Linda. And now I'd like to turn it over to Michael Meadows-Worth to talk to us about some of the work that he and his colleagues have been doing in using labor market information.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
My name is Michael Meadows-Worth with Texas State Technical College. I think we're familiar with the college as a state system. 4 accredited colleges moving to a single accreditation next year. 11 locations around the state and growing. That number may be wrong today. I don't know. I haven't checked the mail. But growing around the state. I want to give 3 specific examples of uses of LMI. I want to talk to Vice Chair's point to some degree about the limitations or some of the questions that were related to that as well, and then specifically focus on an example of faculty and departments using that data proactively. The first example is LMI to drive outcomes. TSTC's funding model is now deeply tied to this LMI data. The UI wage record information that we get from the Workforce Commission comes to the coordinating board, is matched or linked with our student files, and then we look at a 5-year earnings trend over time. That data does not capture every single student, doesn't capture every person in the state of Texas. You have to be working at the company that has a certain number of people before you have to pay UI insurance. So what this gives us is a really solid estimation, a good trajectory of where we're moving in what direction. That UI data drives just under 38% of our overall funding. It's our largest, our A&I portion of that. So there's a large motivation, 1, to pay attention to that data, and 2, to make certain that we can get it as accurate as possible, as accurate as we can. The biggest impact on the college largely has been culture. Focusing on the LMI output data rather than focusing first and foremost on enrollment has caused everyone in the institution, from our program chairs, placement, recruiting, marketing, to really ask the question first and foremost, where is the market demand? The most important factor in the LMI data would be, is there sufficient job demand in the market? And we'll get into a couple of examples of those in a second. This is looking at using the LMI data to look at the first-year combined earnings of our graduating cohorts over from 2009 to 2012. And we've seen a fairly significant increase in the earnings. Now, to be fair, this is also reflective of a larger increase in output of our students over that time. But the average earnings per students have gone up. So we're producing more placements, a higher degree of placement rate, and a higher degree of average earnings per students. So those are the kind of trends that we want to see. We look individually at departments to look at their 5-year first-year earnings, and we see how those trends are going. If we see a program that has 5 years of declining first-year earnings, and every other program in the state in that area has had a consistent or uptick, we know, well, that's not a market condition, that's a program condition. So those are some of the ways that we use the LMI earnings data to drive our outcomes. This is an example of the coordinating board's data tool for gainful employment data. And with this tool, you can download the actual earnings at an annual level. In 2013, they have 1 quarter of data. One area where we could have some additional data here is seeing quarterly data points released rather than just the annual. We're obtaining that data file from the Workforce Commission now, but there's a lot of real value in seeing quarterly changes in the numbers. With more data points, the more questions we can answer. The next one is aligning curriculum. Similar to Dr. Head's approach, we want to identify where there's sufficient demand. And we also want to look at the earnings and the growth rates. Are there a sufficient number of jobs? The job demand data that we have out there publicly available is important to look at with multiple lenses. The vast majority of people are employed by small and medium-sized companies in the state and the nation. And the vast majority of those jobs are not posted online. There are lots of jobs that are not posted online that we don't detect in those data tools. So we have to get out into the community and do really objective gathering. I say the most legitimate LMI data is when you're face-to-face with that employer on their location.
Let me ask you this. If they're not posted online, where are they putting that information out?
A lot of those are in recruiting through trusted referrals or recommendations. I need somebody that can do UI, UX, and there may not be a job posting. There may just be a network. So that's the majority of job placements come through those kinds of interactions, not through a Monster or a Craigslist necessarily.
Yeah, I just didn't know if there was some other source because, if those are, like you said, generally small to medium-sized businesses, I'd have still thought there would be a more formalized or more technological way to get those postings out there.
It varies dramatically. It also varies by industry dramatically. The IT industry or an engineering industry that's more comfortable or familiar with technology will be more apt to post a job posting. One that's working in a less technologically advanced field that doesn't use browsers on a daily basis will be less inclined to.
And would you back up a little bit? And what exactly is LMI?
Sorry. Labor market information. Apologize. So labor market information is a broad body of data points from the Department of Labor or Texas Workforce Commission. Sorry for that. I've been doing this a long time, so I use some jargon. And then, so demand. Is there sufficient demand for the target occupation? When we start a new program, we want to make certain the target occupation is valid. If we have an existing program and we see low earnings, we have to ask the question, is the target occupation still valid? It could be that there was a shift in the market, some convergence, jobs have combined or changed. And so before we spend time retooling a program, is the target occupation still valid? If it is valid and we have earnings or placement rates are off or not where they need to be, then we ask, are we working with the right curriculum? Are we teaching things that are properly aligned? And then the third question is, are we working with the right employers? I will say this, the online LMI data is very useful for finding new employers. I'll give you an example of that in a second. I mentioned skill alignment. So for more than 10 years, one of my jobs at TSTC was forecasting emerging occupations. And over that time, it became obvious that SOC codes, which are part of the LMI, it's what the Department of Labor and our friend Rich Rochelle, recently retired from the Workforce Commission, uses to do job projections. Everything lives in what's called a SOC code. I'm a post-secondary administrator, according to the Department of Labor. But there are big gaps. For example, there is not a SOC code for a helicopter pilot. They're just lumped in with commercial pilots. There is not a SOC code for an instrumentation technician, some of the highest paying technical jobs we have in the state. So there is no LMI data that gives us a projection of the demand in those areas. So that's an example of the nuances in these data sources that if I produce a chart based just solely on LMI data, we will completely miss those nuances. We had to approve a helicopter program recently. We just started a new helicopter pilot training program. The average age of helicopter pilots is in the 50s, and there are few programs. They're very expensive for the most part, so we had to acquire a number. Helicopters are not cheap. And so we did that program, but we had a hard time justifying it with any data. We had to go into the field, find the employers, and talk to them to get actual face-to-face estimates. The skill alignment at that point, though, is a really critical topic. If we have a right target occupation, am I teaching the right skills? Well, we've partnered with the Workforce Commission and Coordinating Board with a project to analyze skills of job postings and of curriculum, getting out of the SOC code, out of the job title, and into the actual DNA of skills so that we can do much more granular alignment. One quick example of that. Boeing and Lockheed, both in the same geographic region, the Dallas general area. Boeing, of course, focuses more on, well, a lot of areas, but one of their key areas is rotary aircraft, helicopters. Lockheed, F-35, F-16 as well, a bunch of others as well. They both need machinists, but the machinists that Lockheed needs and the machinists that Boeing need are slightly different. Boeing really needs angle grinding. It's a very specific skill set. It's hard to do, to make that rotor gear. Lockheed couldn't care about angle grinding. They want autoclaves, for baking the F-35 to make it radar resistant or things like that. So the point is that to really do high-level alignment, if I want to make that graduate the most employable, I also have to understand the nuances of the skills with different employers for the same program. So that's kind of the area that we've been moving to in analyzing job postings and trying to target specific employers. We use LMI data, these tools, for regional strategies. There's a difference between a welder, for example, in Port Isabel and one in Amarillo. Welder in Port Isabel is going to have a scuba certification, offshore oil rigs and things like that. You may have a scuba certification in Amarillo. I don't know what good it's going to do you, but there are differences in the skill sets, even regionally. And then lastly is benchmarking. Benchmarking data is extraordinarily valuable to us. I mentioned the data that was used previously from the Coordinating Board and Workforce Commission. We've launched a website called c4eo.org. On this tool, on this website, there's actually an animation that plays. I don't know if on your mouse you can move the mouse and see if that clip will play. Looks like there's an arrow. If it doesn't, nope, okay, that's fine. So that site provides first-year earnings, 5-year earning comparisons for every public higher education institution in the state by degree or award level, award type. And so we built that tool for our own internal use for benchmarking. It's based on the Coordinating Board and Workforce Commission data, but it makes it really accessible to see trending information, trending data. Our general approach is that I've never met a faculty member that did not want their students to be the most employable and succeed the most. But what they may not have is all the information. So instead of, what we don't want to do is dictate to a department exactly what they need to do. Our faculty may be industry experts with 20 years of experience working in their field. We as administrators can't cover 150 occupational areas with a level of expertise. So what we want to do is trust that department chair, provide them with supporting data to make informed decisions, and then we want to look at benchmarking outcomes and see if you're on target. Frankly, if you're having the highest placement and earnings rates, use project-based learning, use peanut butter and jelly, use whatever approach that you think is best that reaches that outcome. Whereas what we've historically done has been really focused on process of instruction. And it can vary. It can vary greatly by department or a program or an industry. Competency-based learning, for example, is one good example. We see that CBL is going to work really well in a lot of our programs. But there are some, like the FAA, that have a very rigid structure for how you do instruction. It's going to be more challenging. So we wouldn't try to fit that round into the square peg into the round hole. Nuance, I guess, would be the underlying message of that. The next area that we're focusing on is soft skills. And we have modeled with the Workforce Commission, actually the Workforce Commission modeled, and we've expanded on over more than 950 occupations, the hard skill profiles of those. That data was based on input from over 4,000 Texas employers and validated by 1,400 Texas SMEs, subject matter experts. And the hard skills are great. It is the #1 skill that is lacking when employers are asked what they need most, according to the Manpower 2014 study, 13 and 12. The second is soft skills. The head of HR Boeing says, I hire for hard skills, I fire for soft skills. Critically important, both equally. So what we've now done is we've attached soft skills with the workforce support from the Workforce Commission to more than 950 occupations. And so we have soft skill profiles that are giving us a greater understanding, not just that we need to have critical thinking, but how important and what other soft skills are most important to that target occupation. This is a CEO, for example, and we see that leadership and oral communication, critical thinking are at the top. This is a carpenter. Attention to detail. Measure twice, cut once. This is one trip to Home Depot, not 3, you know. So what we're trying to do, again, is be more overt about understanding the relationships of the hard skills and the soft skills so that we can teach and assess those more clearly. We think that showing a profile to a potential employer of someone's level of mastery of all of those hard skills is great. But if we can also show them examples of their level of mastery of their soft skills, even better. So we get that information using LMI data, job postings, and then survey validation. The last example is to work smarter. I mentioned moving towards competency-based education. The core of that is focusing on the core skills, sequencing those in a logical manner. We do package them back out for articulation. We're just getting started on that still. Serving our students' needs is the core purpose of that. I'll give one anecdotal example of this. This was in our East Texas location, and we had a student walk in that wanted to be a welder. And in the course of the interview, it was determined that the person had actually been in prison for about 7 years, nonviolent offender, but they'd served some prison time. So immediately that limits some of the occupations that this person will be eligible for. We know that in the wind industry, for example, it's just a non-starter. And a few other fields. In the course of the interview, we asked, well, what did you do while you were in prison? He says, well, I welded. Well, how well can you weld? I didn't have much else to do. I think I'm pretty good. So in that example, what we would have done typically is had you take Accuplacer or some test to determine if you were remedial or not. Once you were determined in likelihood to be remedial, we would schedule those semesters. Your chances of completion rates, although at that location is some of the highest completion rates in the state, are low. And instead what we did is walk that student into a laboratory with a faculty member, expert, and go down the list of competencies, record the level of mastery in 1 week, and turn out a piece of paper, not a certificate, not a degree, that said, we certify that this person knows these competencies. And they got a job almost just under $100,000 with 1 week of just validation of competencies in a Houston oil and gas company. So they were never an enrollee, by the way. If they had enrolled, they would have looked like a dropout. But they were a successful placement. Now, interestingly, they would never be counted in our funding model because they have to take at least 9 semester credit hours. We would hope with prior learning assessment and more thinking outside of the rigid structures of a semester approach that we could start to operationalize some of those kinds of solutions individual to that student. Completely outside of the normal way of thinking, though. What is most important to our mission is economic development for the state, for the student. And so what is the most important thing to do in that point? Connect them with the job. So if we can validate competencies quickly, how much do we care about that degree? Now, I will say this. We want to back end those credits back towards a degree when later that person decides they want to get a degree. But in the immediate time, connecting them with employment will prevent them from maybe returning back to prison. Changing understanding. Yes?
So do you have veterans coming to you with the same sort of abilities and need for a job, and you can verify those skills like that?
Yes, we have veteran centers at each of our 4 colleges, and we employ a number of colonels from the Air Force and even a chief from the Army, which is the highest, that's the highest enlisted rank, that are really passionate about veterans.
Right.
So that gets into prior learning assessment. How quickly can we turn an MOS into credits? Mm-hmm. And our historic structure is so focused, resource-wise, lab scheduling, faculty, on a semester-based system that it makes it really resource-intensive to have a separate prior learning assessment capability. Right. Our hope is that we can unpack some of those things with a competency-based approach, that the funding model will enable us to focus on core value rather than process.
I love that.
And that's going to take some time, but that's the general strategy.
That should be our goal. You're right. And ultimately, it's about finding people and placing them and getting them in jobs. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Or fulfilling student intent would be another one as well. If a student's intent is to transfer, or a student intent is to, and that intent changes over time also. So to be sensitive that today you may think that you want to just come in and get validated to get a welding job, but a year from now you may want to get another degree, or so all of those things are part of that.
But in the meantime, you can feed your family while you're in school.
Right. To that point, one of the things that we've become more aggressive with is looking for companies that have solid progression plans for their employees. We want to place students that have really good progression plans and have tuition reimbursement. Before we didn't look at that. We did to some degree. But now we're inherently focused on the progressive earning of that graduate. If they get a job and they flatline, our funding model is affected. We want to have a progression plan. So I'll give you an example here in a second. This is about how we engage industry differently. And I'll tell a personal story. This is Edgar Padilla. Edgar Padilla is the Director of Career Services at the time for our Waco campus, now for the state with TSTC. Historically, when we would do job fairs, we would advertise, we're having a job fair on March 13th, please show up to industry. And we would get industry that needed to hire. We would get some colleges that were recruiting students for transfer. We would get some staffing agencies that maybe didn't have the most attractive jobs for our students. And then the seats would fill up. Well, instead, Edgar used some of these real-time tools that were mentioned to identify employers that were actively hiring, specifically in the areas for which he had students that career fair, who had the highest pay, who had progression plans, and he did an invite-only career fair, and industry had to pay to be there. They had to sponsor the career fair, which would cover the cost and go towards scholarships. His only complaint was that he didn't charge enough. So that's an example of, we didn't come up with that at a central administration, giving those tools to individuals and then placing clear metrics on what the expectation is. We see different kinds of innovation happening around the organization that we couldn't have thought of. That's a good one.
So at a career fair like that, which is different, so the results of placement, were they substantively higher, or could you measure that from a more standard type of career fair?
So that's a great question. The data points that we rely on for objective earnings and placement data are these UI data that we were talking about, and we have an over 1 year delay to get that data. That's how long it takes for that to be not at a cohort level. They need to give them time to get a job placement. We collect the data. All the colleges, I think, do you do the 116?
Yeah.
Right. So,
and we also do the very focused, targeted. It's not really a job fair anymore.
Right. So the 116 is a report that we have to provide to the coordinating board on earnings and placement data. That data is self-collected by the individual department. So in order for that data to be more, I guess, broadly adopted, things like audits or checks to make certain that it's there is required. And this is very labor intensive. The Workforce Commission had a very large staff at one point that would do follow-ups and really put a lot of statistical certainty into it. As a college, we would love to have greater transparency and data like that to put it to work. As a state, it would take some resources for any agency to be able to provide that more directly. So that would be my answer to that. We do surveys and follow-ups, and a lot of you can go to a department chair and ask them, give me where every one of your students is right now from the last, and they know inherently, and we report that data in the 116. But we don't use that for our state reporting or third-party references without it having the real third-party validation and checking. And I agree with that. So I think we'd love to see more support for that data being validated. It's a good accountability measure. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, question to Michael. In your example of the gentleman that had the welding skills, where you're actually testing and certifying core competencies that are necessary, where is the business model in that? And how does the state and how do we give you credit for certifying someone without actually enrolling, without, that's exactly the example of what we want to have happen in this state. You're connecting future employees with future employment, and yet you don't get anything for it in return, and you don't get any credit, and the state doesn't really track it.
So that's a great question.
That's why I ask it.
It's a great. Let me unpack it for a second. So traditionally, there's this hard line between continuing education and for-profit, the non-credit and the for-credit, and our previous structure of contact hours really focuses to stay loyal towards a semester-based approach. Technically, we could unpack under contact hours and still operate on a quarter basis or on a CBL basis. There's not an inherent structural limitation to it. It's more of but we've always done it that way kind of limitation, I think, a cultural limitation. So in the case of that individual, if we were able to certify 9 semester credit hours of skills, they would be included in our current model. At the time we did that, we weren't under a return value funding model, and we are not awarding credit. We aren't awarding credit yet in that prior learning assessment. We want to get there. We'll get there with our accreditors' support and making certain that we're really careful. What we don't want to do is open the floodgate too quickly towards very quick prior learning assessment for credit without good quality controls on that. So it's not the best answer I'd love to give you, but it's the most responsible one I can say. I expect that as we unpack from the semester credit model, implement more CBL approaches, looking at how this legislative session goes with these changes in the funding model to give us more cultural push forward that this is real, that we would see more innovation at the campuses happen in that regard. So we're in that. It's turning the battleship, but we're moving that direction.
So I could see that this would be a rare individual who would come and really possess all the core competencies necessary for immediate employment. But it would seem to me that you ought to be able to charge for master trainers.
Sure.
40 hours that they spent, you ought to be able to record that they were given a certification of some type.
Sure.
And maybe it's a contingency contract based upon their first 5% of their first year's employment that comes back to the institution to fund it. I'm kind of thinking about these things in a different way. I would assume if you saw gaps in their competencies, you'd then have a learning portfolio plan put together saying, these are the 9 semester hours you need to have to be able to get this certification. We're going to enroll you next semester. We're going to get credit because at the end, we'll get credit with the state. You're going to pay us tuition, but at the end, we've got a job waiting for you. To your point on finances, 4 key areas we hope to grow on that. The tuition one is not, that individual and student loans is the way we'd prefer not to go ideally. The Department of Education just approved us for federal financial aid for competency-based learning. I think fewer than 10 in the country so far have that status, so that is one area that we will now be able to have federal financial aid. But more to the point, the industry and employers have a large skill shortage in these areas. So the staffing agency model that you're referencing, where we're charging for a placement effectively, a staffing agency model where that employer is more directly. Why would they pay a staffing agency for recruitment? Why aren't they paying us for that?
Right. So
a staffing agency model, I think we'll see some of those start to evolve more and more. The funding model would be the fourth. The funding model coming in with 9 semester credit hours. So all four of those kinds of areas. Did I name 4? I think so. Is how we can distribute that cost. Where we have not aggressively pursued yet is the staffing agency model. Edgar Padilla's example of charging industry to come to a targeted career fair proved that there's a viable business model, we think, for a direct financial investment into talent, and we will be exploring that more aggressively.
One other hurdle is SAC's credentials requirements of faculty. So as we talk competency-based, right now, most of us our faculty credentials to offer college credit are based on a course. They're that detailed at a course, not a program. So it also makes it a little difficult in the semester credit hour model to one instructor teaches these competencies, but they have to be able to roll into the next and the next and make it a more fluid approach than this traditional. They can teach history 1301, they can teach welding 1301, they can't teach welding 2428. We could use some help with that.
And a follow-up question, you use the term soft and hard. In our vernacular, in my industry, it's technical and non-technical. The soft skills are hard to learn, and if you don't have them, you may never get them. So I just really think that they're all core competencies that are necessary for being successful in a workforce environment, no matter what you're doing, driving a truck or operating on human beings.
Yes.
So, I mean, I really think that you ought to kind of focus on technical, non-technical, but they're all essential, either clinical or core competency skills necessary.
If our friend Rich Rochelle was here, he would have bopped me on the head, because the proper term that he uses is workplace basics instead of soft skills, because he feels soft skills kind of, pushes them to the side.
It does.
They're fundamental workplace basic skills. I mean, to that point, we sometimes think that the only way to learn soft skills is in the pages of Beowulf, and it happens in the classroom, it happens in the laboratory so often. One story back in Marshall, I was touring a program and I opened this automation PLC, very complicated thing. And all of the wires were perfect and beautiful and amazing. It looked like a piece of sculpture. And I asked the faculty member about that, and he said, well, He said if looks didn't matter, all M&Ms would be brown, basically. The point was that the attention to detail, which is, by the way, the number one statistically in those 950 occupations, attention to detail is the most important workplace basic through the mapping of those skills. Critical thinking, problem solving, those things are there as well. But attention to detail, showing up to work on time, basic fundamentals are critical. And so I think there's an evolution in our thinking that we can teach those workplace basics and those hard skills in either of those settings. And if somebody hasn't grown up with the expectation of having those kinds of behavior patterns, that's a large part of what happens in our classrooms with expert faculty that set those expectations. The teaching of the hard skills, we can teach anybody to weld for the most part. You can't teach me to climb on top of a 300-foot tall wind turbine. Not going to happen. But the soft skill components, those are the things that we really focus half, if not the majority of our time, I think, on in the classroom.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest non-technical skill that we're bringing into physician education, and this is a newsflash, patients get better outcomes when physicians know how to communicate with nurses and communicate with patients.
Right.
And so communications is absolutely essential, the ability to read, write, and understand the English language.
Yes.
And anyone in this country that doesn't have those skills is really handicapped.
The Lexile Quantile scores, the math and the reading scores for an instrumentation technician are higher than an English major because of the technical manuals and the words that are used. There's such a level of verbal and literacy that's required in those fields. There's a growing, I think, appreciation, kind of a paradigm shift happening culturally. That's a greater appreciation for that, for those differences and similarities, if you will.
Right. Anything else, committee?
So, Linda, I had a question. I've not seen this burning glass data before. Is that a proprietary company that does that?
Yes, it is.
I mean, this is the type of things that really should be part of our Gen TX. Are we linking those? I mean, this is really some dynamite data here. And what are you doing in your community to get down to the middle school and early high school level to get those students to have that persistence to push through to get that degree, the diploma, so that they can then come to your college and get one of these jobs?
Well, with House Bill 5, we're working very closely with our high schools, and we went through an RFP process a few months ago, and we are using burning glass as our tool for students to look at to help determine their major. So it's not just, it started as a labor market analytics tool we used for program development, but now we're using it also, we have another committee of advisors that includes the high school CTE directors, and we presented at the regional conference actually a few weeks ago in Houston of CTE directors, and to share that information so their students and the parents can see it. So when they want their kid to be a doctor or a lawyer, they might also consider truck driving at $38,000 and see some of the salaries and the speed at which you can get educated and trained to get there. Middle school, we don't have a comprehensive program, but again, high school, we have a cool model where National Oil Varco is paying for high school kids to go through CTE program at the community college their senior year of high school. So they are awarded high school credit and college credit in welding and machining. Because the high school didn't have these programs and they didn't have the labs, and the parents were sold on the idea, especially CNC machining, what a great job for a man or a woman, and are putting them through. I recently am in a women's organization that gives scholarships to high school girls that have children, and as we interviewed these high school girls, every single one of them, 12 of them, when you asked them what their major field of study was going to be, was nursing. and none of them had the grades to get into a nursing program. And so a lot of our work is educating the high school counselors and the middle school counselors and our own advisors who don't really understand and know these different occupations, what they are, the work environments, how fabulous, how a woman can sit on a stool and run a CNC machine. It's not a manual labor job from the days when my dad ran a machine shop, a tool and die shop in Erie, Pennsylvania. It's so that same information is being used for advising.
So are your industry partners, are they offering internships so that the 9th and 10th graders can come into the workplace and see what they're doing and really kind of catch the fire? My concern is that, yeah, my mom wants me to be a doctor or a lawyer, or my dad wants me to be a nurse, but maybe there's something else that when I see that, I'm going to actually study math and complete the course of study to get my diploma so I can go do that job.
I've spent a lot of time in the last 5 years personally in oil and gas, drilling and production, and manufacturing, supporting oil and gas. Because of safety requirements, it's very difficult to get tours and internships in the traditional sense. In job placement, we're shying away from using the term co-op or internship, and we're just saying a part-time temporary job. And we're trying to get our employers to hire part-time temporary employees that are our students, not waiting to the end for this one grand semester. I had internships in undergrad and graduate school, at the end where you get some project or something that you work on, and that's an internship. But that they hire our students throughout, after a first set of competencies, as a part-time temp. And also, we're building, as part of our bond, I forgot to mention, a drilling rig training center. We bought 18 acres of land in the Tomball area. We are, the plan is to have the drilling rig training center so the community can also see it. It's not just for our students. It's so you have a show and tell. They can go, wow, we can't drag everyone to West Texas, but people in Houston are working in West Texas, especially veterans. Our veterans come home, and they're very interested in not being home every day necessarily, and working 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off in West Texas and keeping their family in Houston. But our kids need to see it, and the parents need to see it. They just don't know. A lot of our educators don't know. They don't know. If you ask most of the folks in our college system, what does a petroleum data technician do? They don't know. They don't know what a field service technician does versus an industrial maintenance technician. So a lot of it's just information, but we want the show and tell. So we're building it, and employers are helping to fund it. So that's where the employer helps.
Anything else, Charles?
I just wanted to add a quick note to Dr. Teuscher's comment. We were talking earlier about how to improve data sources that are available. It occurs to me that we also sometimes need to make sure that useful data sources are not degraded. And currently, the U.S. Census Bureau has proposed to eliminate a very useful data field on the American Community Survey, which collects the field of degree for bachelor's holders, which we used quite a bit in this project. We've delivered to the coordinating board a set of data files that maps for the Texas population for every occupation that has bachelor's holders what field they got their degree in, and vice versa. For every field of study, what are the occupations that people in that field are currently holding. And we think that that's useful information, both for purposes like our colleagues have talked about at the institutional level, also for educating students. And the Census Bureau is proposing to eliminate that. There's a public comment period that's going on this month. They've already received quite a lot of feedback, and I think that the coordinate board is going to submit a letter. We're going to also submit one from RAND to say, please don't eliminate this useful field.
Commissioner, is that true? Deputy Commissioners?
I think right?
Susan
There's a letter.
Brown's shaking her head.
We're working
Hopefully
on it.
so.
We're working on a letter for the commissioner. We have public.
You just need you to sign it. Yeah.
Sign here.
Sign here, yeah. All right, so I do believe that we need a motion to accept the proof. We have a motion. Second. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. So thank you for that. Now I understand we'll have Susan Brown and Rex Peoples will come up to present the staff recommendations, and this is for discussion purposes only. And these recommendations will be distributed to the January board meeting. Where is that? In 5T?
After the last. He's the clicker.
Okay. All right.
I'll start with the clicker.
Right here's what we need.
Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what the possible staff recommendations and how the staff will be using this and the recommendations that we're going to be putting forward that will go to the legislature along with the report. This goes over a little bit about what HB 1296 asks us to do, looking at workforce needs and updating those. You heard about the TWC projections that have just been updated and how hard it is to translate the types of jobs available to the actual degrees that are needed. You heard from two of our technical, on the technical side, how there's a little closer to a one-to-one. What do you do about the bachelor's degree in English? How do you translate? Because you have those people that can get jobs in virtually anywhere. There's tech writers, and they're hired all over. There's communication specialists, they're hired all over, not necessarily showing up as a job in communications. So that's one of the difficulties we've had. So Rand developed this planning tool that we'll be showing you, and it's basically a starting point. It is not, you plug the numbers in and you get the answer out the other end. As we talked about, you need a lot of local intervention and information. So what we'll be doing is looking at analysis, looking at the data sources, looking at that sort of thing, and putting the information out on the website. Providing some guidance. We're proposing that we will develop a website that will pull a whole lot of these different data sources together in one place so the institutions can go to one place. We'll be integrating it into our regional plan that you've seen just at the last board meeting, and highlighting some of these best practices, how other institutions are using the information.
In terms of program review that we conduct, we'd also like to try to make sure that all program proposals are referencing common sources of information, which they do a lot now in terms of Texas Workforce Commission data or Bureau of Labor statistics data. But we'd also like to make sure that all programs are referencing common sources of information so that we have some consistency across the board, and that we have a common reference point for trying to determine workforce demand, but we also don't want to preclude other sources of data that institutions may have available to them. But if they want to use alternate sources of data, we'd like for them to justify why they want to use those alternate sources and demonstrate to us that they're at least as valid as other sources are and reliable sources of information. And that may also include, by the way, local sources of information that may not be available at a statewide or a nationwide level, but they may have at a local or a regional level to use as well. And then they should also consider more what the slide refers to as multiple sources of production to meet identified needs. And what this really goes to is to take a careful look at the capacity issue. One of the problems that we face in trying to review these proposals is that an institution or a system will look at these demands and workforce needs from the point of view of they will supply all of them across the state of Texas. But part of what we're responsible for is making sure that we also look at the capacity. What is it that other institutions can do, and what are they supplying? And so that last bullet actually refers to the notion of also having institutions make sure that they, along with coordinating board staff, are also really looking at this issue of capacity, both in terms of location, but also in terms of modes of delivery. As you remember, one of the previous reports really from the RAND Corporation really made the strong argument that one of the things that we really need to be looking at is can programs be delivered on a statewide basis by online education? Do they also require hybrid, which may require a more regional approach, or are they really programs that dictate face-to-face? And so those issues of capacity also need to be carefully looked at as well. Yeah. But there are also some challenges in determining program need that we're hopeful that a lot of the frameworks will help us with. Charles really mentioned earlier this whole issue about trying to match program needs and workforce needs to the programs and occupations to the program. And it's not always clear. Oftentimes there's more of a one-to-one correspondence, but oftentimes there's just the information that we get is on an industry-wide level that may employ a lot of different occupations. And there are a lot of occupations that go across a number of industries as well. So some of these tools that you've already talked about, both from Linda Head and from Michael Bettersworth, also try to get at this issue too of how do you better identify and make a match between the program that the institution is offering and the actual occupations that are available out there. One of the other big issues is that emerging fields and how to try to identify what's going to be the occupations of the future. And there's really two aspects to this. One is that oftentimes we don't know what occupations will exist 10 years from now. And I think this is where the soft skills, non-technical skills really play a big part in helping students adapt to those things. But the other is that even though there may be a clearly demonstrated need for a program today, is there a clear, what is that demand going to look like 4 years from now or 2 years from now when those individuals graduate from those programs, and what can we do to try to get ourselves a better picture of what is the need going to be when we actually have graduates, not what is the need today when we're starting a program. And that's difficult. And the level of program need is often not precise. For a lot of fields, you can get some pretty good industry data, you can get some good occupational data, but what is unclear often is at what level do you need folks. And when I say level, I mean at a bachelor's, a master's, or a doctoral level. And at what level do you need people? Is that demand really mostly for bachelor's degrees? Is that demand primarily for master's degrees? And that is oftentimes very, very difficult to discern. And then lastly, one of the things that we also want to make sure that programs look at, and they do now, and we want to try to strengthen this as much as we can, is there may be a need for something, but do we have enough students to actually develop a strong program? And what that really goes to is what do we need to do then to back up perhaps in our educational system to make sure that we have the students that we need to have a strong program. And this probably is most apparent in STEM programs. Do we need more engineers? Well, maybe we do, but do we have enough students who are qualified to go into engineering programs to fill that need? And then what do we need to do to make sure that we have enough qualified students? Interesting point was raised earlier about the students who all wanted to be nurses, but none of which had the grades to do so. So what do we have to do to make sure that we have enough students with the appropriate prior training and learning to be qualified to enter into those programs?
This is a statewide example of the matrix that RAND has developed. They've also developed this at each of the regional levels. It shows on the left-hand side the demand for those different occupations, and obviously these are at high-level occupations, and the supply across the top. As you can see, there's a whole lot of uncertain. And so that's one of the areas. If you have a low demand and a low supply, you're probably okay. If you have a high demand and a high supply, you may or may not be okay. You may need even a higher supply. You have that middle area where you got a medium demand and a medium supply or low supply, where you really need to do additional work and really go in and do some of that in-depth review of what's available, and that's where you get into more of the nuances that have already been talked about. Here are some of the data sources that we plan on bringing together and putting links to our site. There's a lot of information, and as you can see, there's the American Community Survey that Charles just mentioned is looking at dropping one of the things that we feel is very important. So yes, there is a letter being drafted for your signature talking about why it's important, and we have multiple bullet points on that, how we use that data and how important it is to all the states. And as Charles said, they've already received quite a few comments on their idea of dropping that, so hopefully they won't do that. We are going to be continuing working with TWC very closely on these things. Also with TEA, as Rex mentioned, we need to look at not only the what we need from higher ed, but do we have the students coming through K-12 to fulfill, that have the skills to get them prepared for higher ed. And then we're actually the coordinating board staff is going to be doing a testing of EMSI in the next few weeks, looking at the type of data provided, and then maybe possibly trying to negotiate some type of a bulk subscription for those small institutions that don't have the resources to subscribe to it. Maybe we can get the rate down for everybody if we do a statewide look at that. Not necessarily with EMSI, but also, would put out something for all the agency or all the for-profit type companies that are doing that type of work, and to see what we can do to maybe help some of those smaller institutions have access to the same data. One of the things that was raised in the report was considering a database of degree program capacity, because right now we know how many students are enrolled at an institution. We don't know what necessarily their capacity to grow is. And this would be very helpful for the program side, is to get that information. And also for institutions that are considering developing a new program, they don't know, the college down the street or the university across the, region might be able to boost their enrollment very easily by adding 1 or 2 faculty and cover the entire need. So we need to start doing some of that. And so we're proposing that we start collecting some of that type of data once a year to survey the institutions to get what is their capacity in some of these programs. How are they, A&M just announced their 25 by 25. So that's a huge number of engineers. What is that going to do to everybody else? So those are just the recommendations that will be forward. We'll be putting those out for public comment and getting information back from the schools.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you going to share cost with another agency on this, since there will be really others using this website a lot, TWC or any other agency that might partner with us on this? This won't be a cheap build, I don't think.
Oh, you're talking about
cost
for the
of the website
statewide?
Yeah.
Oh, the website. We will be linking to their data.
Okay.
So it will be
Within
within our website. We would be linking to their already existing websites. So if they're really interested in one area, the TWC data, they can go there. We already have the gainful employment. We'll be pulling that gainful employment into our website.
Are you going to merge any of the information and make it interactive? Or
we actually have a website that we will be showing you shortly that's called Texas Cruise, where we do a lot of that type of thing. We look at by degree program, by institution, by level, what their wages are 1, 3, 5, 8, and 10 years out.
So if I wanted to build a report and make the criteria fairly specific, I could do that, or I'd need to download everything and do it separately?
Right now, you would need to download, and that's something we'll have to work with our IT.
Well, it may be easier to do that, so, and
Yeah.
probably a lot cheaper.
And we've actually, because we have all the student data and we get the UI wage record data, TWC actually funded the development of the Texas Cruise site, even though we're hosting it and we have
Okay,
all the
so there
student
is some
data.
shared,
So we
yeah.
are already doing a lot
Okay.
of sharing with TWC, and TEA is linking to that on from their site. So.
Commissioner.
It's I'm very excited about the work that's being done in this area, and it's something that I've been pushing on, the whole idea of marketable skills and so forth. But I hope we recognize the limitations of what we're doing. Charles has pointed this out. Some of the prior slides indicated this. It's important to remember that any number of studies show that somewhere between 20 and 25% of the jobs will be in high demand a generation from now, 15 or 20 years from now, don't exist today. It's also, there are also any number of studies that show that the workers that are coming through the pipeline now will change careers on the average of 3 or 4 times during their work lifetimes. Not change jobs, change careers. And so it's important to recognize that there's a whole lot of indefiniteness about the work we're doing and about predicting what jobs will be in high demand and the kind of training that students will need to prepare for those jobs. And that's why I think it's real important to understand and to advocate for the idea that because there is still a great deal of uncertainty, what we have to advocate for young people, particularly in high schools, is that everybody needs to get a solid academic foundation. You know, you can't assume that, well, I'm going to go into this particular job field, so I don't need a lot of math. I'm going to become a carpenter, so I don't need a lot of English. We've got to make sure that everybody gets a solid academic foundation so that they're as nimble as they can be in terms of their work.
I have one more thing. I want to announce that Gary Johnstone has given his resignation. So, and he was very important in this process. So, I just wanted everybody to thank him. And it's very sad for me. So, any other questions?
Can I just, what was the thinking behind the Census Bureau eliminating or wanting to eliminate that data? I mean, that's such significant, important.
Yeah, I have the report. So they've got a process by which they look at every question that are on their major surveys periodically, and they scan published literature to see how frequently certain data fields are used, and then they have some kind of matrix tool that they developed that says which are the high cost to administer and low usefulness. And they identified, I think, about 14 items that fell into that category. But for some reason, they simply failed to pick up all the uses of this data element. Many of the other data elements that are on their list are there with good reason, because they're very high. Like, just to give you an example, I don't remember the exact question, but they collect data on all the number of times that the individual has been married in their life. And it turns out researchers don't use that very much. They tend to use, are you currently married? Were you ever married in the past, or something like that? But whether you were ever married 2 times or 3 times or 4 times doesn't show up in a lot of tabulations. But for some reason, when they did this process, they just failed to pick up on all the users. And it turns out, I mean, one of the reasons I actually think this is not going to be an issue, because the National Science Foundation runs a major congressionally mandated survey where they build the sampling frame using this question on field of degree, because they have to identify the population that has a science and engineering bachelor's degree and then sample within that population. And so they've actually turned in a letter that says, if you do this, we will have to run a custom data collection in order to populate our survey that'll cost the federal government all these millions of dollars to do that. So in addition to all the academic uses and the policy uses.
So your anticipation is they're going to continue to collect?
I think that the result of the public comment will be that they'll continue to do this. I mean, in fact, what we might say, I haven't coordinated with Susan and the staff on the letter, but we might want to say, well, actually what we want is we want you to expand this and not only ask about the field of degree at the bachelor's level, but it'd be great if you'd ask about the field of degree for other levels of education as well, because that would be very useful.
Okay. Just one other thing. Gary, we're really sorry that you're leaving. You've contributed so much outstanding work, and you will definitely be missed. I didn't know this morning that your commute was 80 miles one way. You must have really loved your job here. But thank you very much for your service.
So that concludes the report. And once again, Charles, thank you for being here again. It's great to see you. And I did not get a chance to thank Linda Head and Michael Bettersworth for their input. It was really, I think I speak for the whole committee, it was great information. I really appreciate you bringing them here for them and them sharing with us what they're doing. It was a really good presentation.
Thank you.
Right. Moving along. Agenda item 5B was on the consent calendar, and agenda item 5C is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to approval of the enrollment forecast. Supplemental information was provided to the board last week and is also at our table. Susan Brown, Assistant Commissioner, Strategic Planning and Funding, will provide a presentation.
And it's going to be very short because we're running a little bit behind. We do an enrollment forecast every 2 years because things change. It is used to say where we would be in the outer years if nothing changes. And that's a very important if nothing changes. So that is why we do it. We only use the information as baseline and it's for universities and community colleges and independent institutions. We don't do it for the health-related institutions because so much of their enrollment is driven by they can enroll X number of medical students, they can enroll X number of this, so theirs does not change a great deal. They are intentionally conservative. We use population projections done by the Texas State Data Center. We look at 5 years of historical trends by for each county, for each race and ethnicity, and for each institution by age groups. And we take those projections and we push them out using the Texas State Data Center population. We then use a non-resident factor over the past 5 years, and then we send it out for institutional comments. We get comments from and that's why it's a supplemental item, is because we actually gave them a December 1 deadline to make sure that they had plenty of time to look at the projections and see if they agreed with them. We did get some comments and we raised them, especially for A&M, who now says they're going to be up to 70,000 students, given their engineering program. Yes. These are the forecasts by sector, and if you'll notice for the 2-year publics, between 2010 and 2015, the community colleges, the 2-year colleges, the enrollment dropped. So that is a big change from prior years. They've been going up and up and up. So that drop. We go out to 2025 this year. We've done these, like I said, every 2 years, and we actually have been relatively accurate at a statewide level. We are off some for individual institutions, and that's based on how their policies that they implement. And that's why we update it, because we want to see what the most recent trends are. So this is a little bit of a decline for from the 2020 that we had before, and that is reflected in the economy and the drop in the two-year college enrollment. As most everything else that we do, it varies by region. The 4 regions with the growth, and you can see even though we have just 3 colors, the ranges are very different. So the green is over 30,000 increase going out to 2025. The yellow is 4,000 to 6,000, and the blue is under 3,000. So the range between that green enrollment and the yellow and the blue is dramatic. Obviously, a lot of this is driven by population. These are the population growth areas of the state. This shows the 2-year in the universities, and even though the 2-year institutions dropped, their enrollment dropped for the last few years, they are still enrolling more, and we expect it to go up. You can also tell that the cycle for the 2-year colleges really is reflective of the economy. When the economy is doing good, their enrollment is usually a little flatter. When the economy goes down, people are going back for retraining. You'll see their enrollment growing up dramatically. As you can see back in 2009, 2010, their enrollment grew considerably. There are drivers. The statewide drivers include the economy, obviously, for the 2-year colleges especially, and the population projections. Institutional policies, one of the things that happened in the prior year, in the past, we had UT Austin who instituted their Caap program, which means students that were kind of on the borderline of being able to be admitted to UT were told they had automatic admission to some of their other campuses. That made a huge difference for UT San Antonio. They had a lot of their students that went to UT San Antonio, made their enrollment grow tremendously in a very short time frame. And to UT San Antonio's benefit, they actually kept a whole lot of those students who qualified to go back to UT but decided they liked it in San Antonio and stayed. So it helped kind of expand and grow that institution. So those are the institutional policies that really do affect the individual institutions. And that's the end of the
report.
That's
All
it.
right, so we need a motion to approve.
I don't think any action is required.
Nope, I had it on my mind that we did. Okay.
Oh, it is a consideration. I'm sorry. The blue page is wrong. It does need a vote.
It does need a vote.
Moved.
Okay. Moved by David, seconded by Janelle. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 5D is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee for approval of the nominated members of the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. Lisa Mahler, Interim Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Student Financial Aid Programs, will provide information on this item. Lisa.
Good morning. I'll be very quick with this. The Financial Aid Advisory Committee was created to make recommendations to the board regarding the development, implementation, and evaluation of state financial aid programs. Excuse me. Coordinating board staff are recommending new member appointments for the committee to replace outgoing members whose terms have expired and to expand representation within certain institutional sectors. Members of the current committee reviewed the nominations submitted by institutional chancellors and presidents and recommended final candidates based on a variety of factors. A list of candidates recommended for appointment to the committee appears on the page following the blue page for this agenda item. And staff will seek confirmation of these appointments at the January board meeting.
Motion by Janelle, a second. Jacob. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Great. Thank you. That was very quick. Agenda item 5E is an update on the Texas Higher Education Strategic Planning Committee activities. Dr. David Gardner, Deputy Commissioner, Academic Planning Policy, Chief Academic Officer, and Susan Brown, Assistant Commissioner, Strategic Planning and Funding, will provide an update.
Thank you. We're going to try to continue the trend to be quick as we're behind schedule. I'd like to begin by thanking all of you that were able to attend the Governing Board Conference. I think those of you that did know that We had an entire morning devoted to the goals and the proposed goals in the new strategic plan. I think it's safe to say that they were well received overall. At the end of the morning, we had discussion groups, and unfortunately our attendance of those were a little lighter than I would have liked, but we had good discussions in those regardless. Just very briefly, the first goal and the statewide goal, in terms of having at least 60% of Texans aged 25 to 34 will have a post-secondary credential and degree. Everyone did agree this was an important goal. They thought it was challenging, but that it ultimately would be achievable, and they thought we had the means to do that. In terms of the second goal, in terms of graduating at least 550,000 students in 2030, the discussion focused primarily on some of the targets that are being considered at this time, and there was a lot of interest in the role that dual credit might play in increasing the number of graduates, and also in terms of how House Bill 5 may ultimately play out in terms of the graduates, and is there anything for us to learn from that as we go forward, and of course a lot of discussion on transfer and alignment. Marketable skills generated a lot of interest as it did this morning. I think the one thing that came out this morning that we're seeing in our discussions as well is that some people think of the job market as a fairly straightforward operation, which it is not. I think I'd like to underline what the commissioners said in terms of we don't really know exactly what will be needed in a number of years, and so we always have to bear that in mind. There isn't a one-to-one relationship. But it's clear that this is a very important goal to everyone. I found this out of state as well. I was at a Complete College America meeting recently, and they're very interested in this goal. So I think we have a real opportunity going forward to make a real difference in Texas in terms of addressing how to make our students more marketable as they go forward to the workforce, and at the same time maintaining all those other things we think are important in higher education in terms of being active players in decision making in the world in terms of government and various policies. Finally, the good feedback in terms of the student loan debt. Most of those discussions really focus on how one might get to that point, and much of it reflected some of the Complete College America agenda in terms of how can one make it more efficient to get to that point, the importance of enrolling in more hours as students enroll in college. We had talked in one of our targets about 15 semester credit hours a semester. They emphasized the point that actually the commissioner has on other levels about 30 semester credit hours a year. At Complete College America, I should say they had some data which supports with every kind of student, whatever their background, if they can enroll in that many hours initially, they're much, much more likely to graduate. So that really summarizes it. I think we're headed in the right direction. We will have a committee meeting a month going forward through the spring. We will get more and more detailed in terms of specific targets and really hone in on key strategies that might help us achieve these goals. I think we're confident enough that the goals are they may be tweaked going forward, but people agree that they're the right goals. They're very student-oriented. And now what is a handful of key strategies that will help us achieve those goals? Thank you.
David had a question real quick on the, my feeling out there is, the marketable skills piece. Lots of enthusiasm, lots of, input on that, and yet the commissioner's comments to that, is that being reflected in the thinking of the Strategic Planning Committee?
We have discussed that, and I think many of us share that. We all know that it's in some ways it's very easy to suggest what jobs are needed tomorrow. The Workforce Commission does the analysis of the ads, and a number of these other companies do the same thing. But even a year from now, it's not as certain that some of these jobs will be in place. Right now, some of these jobs in Texas that have been causing some students not to go directly to college may not be there in a year, given what's happening with oil prices. And I think that's a reminder to all of us that things that can be very hot today, even as soon as a few months from now, may not be as hot. And also the danger of overproducing.
There's also been some interesting work done that there have been that some corporations or some experts in particular fields have exaggerated the demand for workers in certain areas in order to keep wages down.
Yeah.
For example, there was a long article in an important journal a couple of months ago that pointed out there's no real evidence that there's a shortage of engineers. Now that's debatable, and the primary justification for that argument was that wages for engineers, except in very specific regions and in very relatively small fields, that the wages for engineers have been relatively flat for 10 years or so. So there's a lot of controversy, and there's a lot of fluidity in all these claims about market needs and workforce demand. So it's important to remember it's hard to be definitive about some of these issues.
And that's where I just want to make sure that kind of thinking, that kind of balance, that perspective is represented in the strategic plan.
But yeah, we plan for it being, and once we have an actual draft, we need to make sure that it's reflected in that language. And we plan on having a draft available shortly that will need much more work after people provide feedback. But I think it's important for you to know, I think you've seen even this morning that on a staff basis, we're placing much more emphasis on understanding the job market better than we ever have before, and even knowing there are going to be great limitations in terms of what we can know.
Great. Thank you. Agenda item 5F was on the consent calendar, and it brings us to agenda item 5F2. 5F1 was on the consent calendar. 5F2 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to amendments to Chapter 22, Subchapter L, Sections 22.227, 22.230, 22.231, and 22.234 of Board Rules concerning the Toward Excellence, Access, and Success Texas Grant Program. Lisa Muller, Interim Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Student Financial Aid Programs, will provide information on this item. Lisa.
The most significant proposed amendment was recommended by the Financial Aid Advisory Committee and is intended to increase efficiency by encouraging timely graduation and thereby stretching limited Texas grant dollars to serve more students. This change relates to the definition of attempted hours for eligibility period limits. Attempted hours includes semester credit hours that a student enrolls for and drops after the 12th class day. The current rule allows a student to qualify for a grant for 150 semester credit hours attempted while receiving the grant. The proposed rule would allow the student to qualify for a grant for 150 semester credit hours attempted, regardless of whether or not the student received a Texas grant for those awards. A professional judgment option is added to allow eligibility beyond 150 attempted hours based on a student's hardship circumstances, as long as the student does not attempt more than 150 hours while receiving the grant. No comments were received regarding the proposed amendments. The remaining, I should say, there were some clarifying language changes that are not substantive, and in the interest of time, I just wanted to cover the most important one.
Any questions from the committee? A motion to move from Janelle. Need a second. Sada? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Agenda item 5F3 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to amendments to Chapter 22, Subchapter M, Section 22.254, 22.256, 22.257, 22.260, and 22.262 of Board Rules concerning the Texas Education Opportunity Grant Program. Supplemental information is at your place. Lisa will be providing information on the item, and we now hear public testimony at this time. And so we have...
No, I've invited Jane Caldwell to join me.
Okay. So are we going to do public testimony now? Okay.
Yes, and
Lisa, please do.
Okay. I asked Jane Caldwell to join me for the discussion because she represented the coordinating board on the TEOG Negotiated Rulemaking Committee for determining TEOG allocations, and she can help to answer any questions you may have. Jane has been director of grants and special programs for many years and has recently moved to a position as director of student support. So, before I go over the TEOG rule changes, I'd like to provide some pertinent background information regarding the FY 2015 TEOG allocations. Senate Bill 215 eliminated eligibility for initial year awards for students attending two-year institutions beginning in 2015. This was recommended by the coordinating board. $37.3 million would have been allocated to these institutions for initial year Texas grant awards had Senate Bill 215 not authorized the changes. Instead, the amount was transferred to the TEOG program for making initial awards to students attending two-year institutions in 2015, FY15. Rider 63 of the General Appropriations Act required Legislative Budget Board approval of the Coordinating Board's plan for reallocation of the $37.3 million among participating institutions. Board staff originally proposed reallocations based on the TEOG methodology for allocations, since the funds will be issued as TEOG awards. The LBB chose to override those calculations in favor of a method that would ensure that no institution would receive less than 90% of the funds it would have received under the Texas grant methodology. So that's the background, and moving on to the FY 2016-17 allocations. As you know, the negotiated rulemaking committee for determining TEOG allocations after FY 2015 did not reach consensus and was disbanded on July 30th. Therefore, the coordinating board became responsible for developing the methodology to be used. The proposed rule for FY 16 and 17 allocations generates results that are very close to the results of the LBB allocation methodology. If statewide funding equals or exceeds the amount available for FY 2015, no institution will receive less than 90% of its allocation for FY 2015. If statewide funding is less than the amount available for FY15, each institution will receive an amount equal to its FY15 allocation multiplied by a factor computed by dividing the new fiscal year's statewide appropriation by the FY15 statewide appropriation. The proposed rule also establishes a hard deadline, February 20th, for institutions to encumber the funds allocated to them. Unused funds as of that date are swept and reallocated to institutions requesting additional funds. Reallocations will be calculated in the same manner as the original allocation. Allocations will be shared with institutions for comment and verification for a period of 10 working days before final allocations are announced. The proposed allocation and reallocation methodology applies only to allocations for FY 2016 and 17. The two-year life of the amended language will provide time for either a legislative resolution or the establishment of a new negotiated rulemaking committee to meet to determine the methodology for allocations after FY 2017. Other proposed changes to the TEOG rules include the addition of definitions for attempted hours and added language for the rule on discontinued eligibility, beginning with awards for the 2015-16 academic year. In that case, a student may not receive a TEOG award once he or she has attempted 75 semester credit hours, regardless of whether or not the student received TEOG awards for those hours. And again, a professional judgment option is included to allow for exceptions. We received 3 comments regarding the rule on allocations for FY 16 and 17. The president and CEO of the Texas Association of Community Colleges conveyed strong support for the proposed amendments. The chancellor of the Texas State Technical College System conveyed opposition to the proposed amendments and recommended that they be revised to state that the allocation take into consideration the differences in the total cost of tuition and mandatory fees at each institution. The chancellors of the Texas State University System, the president of Lamar Institute of Technology, the president of Lamar State College, Port Arthur, and the president of Lamar State College, Orange, also expressed opposition to the proposed amendments. Staff responses to the comments conveyed appreciation for the feedback and stated the belief that the proposed amendments provide the best compromise for FY 16 and 17 allocations. They generate results that are close to the LBB's allocation methodology for FY15, and their limited timeline provides the opportunity to reassess the issue for allocations for FY18 and later. And that concludes my summary.
Okay, so now we'll have public testimony. We've got Daniel Harper, Deputy Vice Chancellor for Finance from Texas State University, and Federico Pena, Director of Financial Aid, Texas State Technical College, are both here. And so, gentlemen, thank you for being here. And if you'll keep your testimony to 3 minutes each, we would greatly appreciate it. And I'll let you choose. Daniel, are you ready?
I'll start off.
Thank you.
So my name is Daniel Harper. I'm with the Texas State University system on behalf of the 3 Lamar State colleges. Our opposition was laid out, I think, well by Ms. Moeller. Essentially, the recommendation does have a detrimental impact to the state colleges. The recommendation has approximately a 59% decrease in formula, the funding that's delivered by the formula. It does have the 90% hold harmless to get us through the 2 years. We don't believe that it really does comply with the original intent that the coordinating board laid out in their legislative recommendation. Also, we don't believe it complies with or corresponds with the legislative intent of the recommendation. So in short, that's our position.
Anyone have any questions of Daniel? And I can go to Federico, and then we'll have both of them.
Yeah.
Federico?
Thank you again. Thank you for allowing us to be here. And this is our first time for both of us to be in front of the board. In looking at the negotiation rulemaking and the process that was taken, we believe that the Chancellor Reeser made his claim on why he was opposing this proposal. And ultimately, it's the students that we serve across the state, from South Texas to North Texas to East Texas to West Texas. And the methodology of the cost of attendance is one. The other ones were the tuition and fees. And because we're a technical school, obviously our fees and tuitions are a little higher than the regular community colleges. So we felt that our voice was not heard. And we know that we did receive the 90% afterwards, but I think it was after the fact. But we feel that we need to come back to the table and work on this again as a state. But ultimately, what we're hurting is our students. Yes, we have an opportunity to ask for funding in February for reallocation funding. But when we have students that we could potentially have awarded students earlier in the year, we're hurting them and help. We're all about the students and their success and their education.
Okay, great. Thank you, both of you. Questions? Yeah, David?
So obviously this legislative change came from this organization. We owned it. I don't recall that there was ever any projection of some institutions losing over half their funding.
No, sir. I mean, we agreed as well with the coordinating board's recommendation. Our understanding was we would be quote unquote made whole. But as we saw through the negotiated rulemaking process, the runs that we saw based on the formula allocation itself were 40 to 60% decrease in funding, and I'd agree that's probably not the intent of the coordinating board's recommendation.
So in your analysis of the current recommendation, you believe it would still have a shortfall in excess of 40 to 60%?
So based on the formula, based on the hold harmless, it'd be a 10% reduction.
No, I understand that.
But based on the formula itself, from my memory, it was about a 58, 59% formula reduction.
Significantly more than 10%.
Correct.
So where the 10% came in is the LBB intervened.
That was for 2015. The LBB came in and they did a 90% reduction. And my recollection is correct. The staff recommendation today has a 95%. So I misspoke. It was a 95% hold harmless now. Preservation.
Yeah, it's not a hold harmless because this is foreseeable. I mean, if you're going to lose 40% or more of your funding, that's not hold harmless. It's just a floor.
Correct. I mean, moving forward, we'd get through the 2 years of the biennium, and the next, I guess we'd go back through the negotiated rulemaking process if there was a statutory change, and be back at the same position.
So is cost of attendance in this formula?
Cost of attendance is in the formula for the recommendations that the coordinating board staff has provided.
But the cost of attendance is self-reported by the institutions, and even within the same market service area, it's widely variable.
Correct.
How is that possible? It's not a very objective measure, is it?
We don't believe so.
But tuition we can define, that's an objective measure.
Correct.
We know what fees are.
Correct.
So obviously the coordinating board cannot undo the legislation. You would have to go seek legislative remedy, correct?
Correct.
Do you have a proposal of what other rule we could adopt which may mitigate some of the damage to your institution?
So in the letter provided by our chancellor and the presidents, it provided alternate language that included, instead of cost of attendance, the tuition and fee language.
Using objective measures, not the subjective cost of attendance measures.
Correct.
Okay. So again, the cost of attendance is developed by the institutions, not by the coordinating board, not by a state agency, and it's market-driven in those individual markets, correct?
That's my understanding. I will preface, I have never worked on a cost of attendance report.
Okay.
That is correct. The colleges, the institutions are the ones that develop the cost of attendance.
So what is unique about the institutions that you represent other than they have no ability to levy ad valorem taxes?
And so because we don't levy ad valorem taxes, and because of the nature of our tuition and fee, they are larger than they are at the community colleges. So
but that's in statute.
Correct.
You're held to, in the statute, to have those tuition fees that model along the university model. Because you're state institutions, you're not community colleges.
Right.
Correct.
So really we've got two unique types of institutions that are being lumped into the same formula, and that's why we're ending up where we're at. What would be wrong with creating one pool of money that applied to your institutions and another pool of money that applied to the other institutions, and treat people as they are different in those models?
Right.
I think the biggest challenge you'd have is defining what that pot is moving forward.
Couldn't we look at it from a historical perspective? What the total pot of money was for the last 3 biennia? And have a moving average or something?
Yes, sir. And
that may be a possibility.
And that'll mirror, the recommendation that the LBB approved on the total dollar amount that came from, your staff, moving from the Texas Grant Program to the TEOG program.
What do you want to do?
I'm done asking questions.
Yeah.
I want to let everybody else
Anybody?
ask questions.
Well, I'd really like to call up Linda Battles to explain some of this, but I can tell you I don't have the details that Linda could provide, but we looked at this thing over and over and over again. It was brought to my attention, and we've tried to preserve 95% of the funding. We've recommended that we would support a legislative remedy. The community colleges have a different story, and they have many more students. And there's some of these problems are caused by the different character of these institutions compared to community colleges. And maybe in hindsight, they shouldn't have transferred to TOG. But the Legislative Budget Board recommended a resolution of this conflict. And I think we came up with a better model. As Daniel pointed out, the LBB model would have preserved about 90% of the funding for the institutions represented here, and we came up with a model that preserved 95%. So I think we've been over backwards to try to fix it, but there's some structural issues that can only be resolved legislatively. And Linda, you can provide more detail then.
Our intent before last session in recommending to the legislature that we separate the two programs, our intent was to keep the sector, the two-year college sector, whole. At the time, we did not run any formulas by institution to see how individual institutions would be impacted. And in retrospect, that was a mistake. We should have done that, or the institutions could have asked us to do that, and we certainly would have seen the discrepancies. Once we transferred the $37.3 million and ran it through the TEOG formula, which was historically based on headcount, driven by headcount, you have 50 community college districts with multiple campuses, and then you have the 4 state technical colleges and the 4 state colleges, or the 3 state colleges. And as you know, they do have higher tuition and fees compared to the community colleges. When the negotiated rulemaking committee met 4 times, we ran various formulas based on various factors. The first, when we ran it through being sensitive to tuition and fees, a lot of the dollars shifted to the side of the technical and state colleges, and then the community colleges felt like they lost money. So they didn't agree to that approach. So then at our last meeting, somebody came up with the idea of looking at cost of attendance. So we pulled up all of the cost of attendance, which the institutions do report to us, and there seemed to be much more equalization across the board between the institutions. And from the coordinating board staff point of view, we said that seemed more of a equitable approach, since they sort of are pretty much aligned across the board. If you look at just the tuition and fees, then that's where you get a lot of skewed amounts. And so they did take a vote. The committee took a vote on whether to look at cost of attendance. 12 individuals voted for it, and 3 voted against. So they did not reach a consensus and then decided to disband. So that was when our staff came together and said, well, let's look at cost of attendance and see how we can add a hold harmless, so that we can do essentially a Band-Aid approach for the next 2 years, call a new negotiated rulemaking committee to develop a methodology for FY18. I don't know that we'll be able to come up with a methodology that everybody will agree to, which is why we wanted to recommend a legislative remedy and work with the technical colleges and the state colleges on that. And so we're willing and ready and able to do that. But for now, we need these rules in place for the allocation for FY16 by February. Otherwise, nobody's going to get any money. So,
Chairman, I move to accept the Commissioner's recommendation.
I have a motion. Second.
I have a question. Because it is a recommendation, is there language in here to recommend this solution that you're talking about, that this really is the Band-Aid and that we need a permanent solution to the problem?
In the rules, it says that this methodology will apply for the FY16 and 17 allocations, and that a new negotiated rulemaking committee would be created to address the FY18. But in the meantime, if the institutions choose to seek a legislative remedy, that's not in the rules, but essentially the way that they're written, they expire after 17.
Has there been any legislation preliminarily filed?
No.
No, sir.
Do you intend to work on that for the upcoming
yes, sir.
session?
Our first step was to see what the ultimate outcome of the rules were before we moved forward.
Linda, what are the actual dollar amounts involved here?
Call Lisa up with that. Jane?
Because instead of percentages, I think the board would like to know what the actual
Right.
dollar amounts are in terms of shifting them from one place to another.
The original suggestion by the negotiated rulemaking committee, which was just on enrollment, would have moved 1.8 million from the what the LBB calculations had for 2015. The cost of attendance approach is slightly more than that. If we then factor in first-time enrolling students, which is really what you have to be an entering undergraduate in order to qualify for a TEOG. If we add that adjustment, then the cost of attendance impact is 1.7 million being shifted. So it's a little bit better than the original enrollment based.
I second the motion and suggest that we formally support them in their legislative efforts.
Let's have a motion and a second discussion. David?
So I don't understand those numbers. I heard 37.3 million was transferred from Texas grants to TEOG with the legislation.
Yes, sir. The numbers I was quoting was the difference in the amount of money going to the technical colleges of that 37 of total TEOG funds using the LBB model versus the proposed model in our rule.
Right. So if they're successful at gaining legislation to revert them back to the previous TEOG and Texas grant, in other words, undo the 7 colleges that are affected, the 7 state colleges, would it remove 37.3 million?
No, sir. The 37, excuse me.
It's a 1.7 million that's shifted within that 37 million.
That's what we're
I
talking
thought that was
about.
the additional 5% of the hold less harmed.
The total amount being shifted from Texas grant to TEOG was the 37.3 million, which included the money for the community colleges and the technical colleges.
Correct.
Of that amount, the difference in the distribution among the types of institutions using the LBB approach, which had the 90% hold harmless, and the cost of attendance approach, that's where the difference in the results for those institutions goes to 1.7 million.
Okay, and I'm trying to roll back to a base number of, in the previous biennium, what did those 7 colleges, those 7 state colleges receive in Texas grant and in TEOG funds? What was the total combined amount? So that if they are successful and then they're removed from that pool, I'm assuming they go back to that base amount, what would that amount be?
I'm sorry, I don't have those numbers here. The of the LBB numbers, it was approximately 3.7 million that was in the 37.3 million that was allotted to the technical colleges.
And how much to the state colleges?
The state colleges of that received 1.36 million, the TSTC 2.35 million.
So the 3.7 is a combined amount?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the 3.7 is the amount of Texas grants that were moved over, that were previously attributable to them. How much were they receiving in TEOG funds?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information split out.
Okay, and I guess what I'm asking is why could we not have dual formulas, one that applies to the 7 state colleges in the amount or percentage of the amount that was previously received, and allow them to be compared to each other, and put another pool of money, maybe it's 18%, 72%, I don't know what it is, but that's what I'm trying to get at. So if 37.3 million was transferred over from Texas grants to TEOG, and of that, 15% of it was previously given to those 7 colleges, those 7 state colleges, why can't we have the same formula but assigned in 2 different pools of money? Is that not a possibility?
Oh, certainly, yes. It could. Those calculations could easily be done.
It would have
Does
to.
the legislation allow for that?
Yes. Well, it would be required to go through negotiated rulemaking. So the next committee.
Are we past negotiating rulemaking? I thought it failed and they disbanded.
It failed and disbanded. Now we're bringing these rules to you. We could go back and come up with that methodology for January, for the January board meeting.
Correct.
And that's what I'm asking, are we permitted to do that?
For the January board meeting?
Yes.
If we're permitted to do that,
well,
then I think we ought to look at that.
Actually, and Bill might need to come up and help me because that would be a substantive change to the posting in the Texas Register. And that would set us behind to have a formula in place by the spring for FY16 allocations. So I think we're a little behind in terms of timing. Correct.
You're correct. So can you tell me what that time is? What is the timeline that we're missing?
In order for the rules to go before the board in January, they would have needed to have been posted this past Monday at the latest in order to allow for the 30-day posting period for notice and comment, so that any comments on those proposed rules as revised could be received and shared with the board at the January meeting. So we're past the 30-day comment period.
When is the January board meeting?
22nd, I believe. And this is a strange phenomenon, but in order to post with the Secretary of State, you propose to post about a week and a half to 2 weeks in advance of when it actually is posted.
Okay, so
Not
it's
just done electronically. We can't submit them to the Texas Register as maintained by the Secretary of State today and see them posted tonight.
correct. So we've already taken care of that responsibility. We've posted the commissioner's recommendation.
We did for the set of rules that you're considering today.
Correct.
If we have, as Linda described it, a substantive change, which this would be, that would need a reposting of 30 days for comment, just like this first set of rules.
Well, I guess it would depend on your definition of substantive.
Right.
Because I think the committee was well in its right to recommend an alternative methodology. But is it
Agreed.
substantive?
In the event, you'd have two different revenue streams, as I understood the way you described it.
Two pools of money.
Okay.
You have the state colleges and the community colleges.
And two different formulas.
Same formula.
It could be substantive. I guess I can't really say definitively, depending on how those were ultimately put together, that it would be absolutely substantive, but it's a significant change. I'd want a little bit more information to make a definitive call on it.
What's the date that it has to be implemented by?
In the past, allocations have been typically announced to the institutions in April, May, in that area, earliest in the end of March, sometime in April. This is a legislative session year, so the funding for those years is uncertain until we get to June. But for the institutions trying to allocate funds and make awards, we have run preliminary calculations in the spring to give them as much information as we could so they could start packaging for the fall term. So again, it would be late March, early April at the latest.
So April, we would have a board meeting.
End of April.
Certainly before the beginning, early May, we would have another board meeting, another opportunity. If it was deemed substantive and we had to repost, we could still kick the can down to the April board meeting.
You still have 20 days after the board adopts for them to go into effect, correct?
Technically, yes, by statute, that's correct. The board can honor its own work, however, during that 20-day period as though they were in effect, if it chooses to do so. And of course, to add one other factor, a special called board meeting could be had in case.
Yes, that was what I was going to bring up as well. So you have committee meetings in March, and we could have a special called for that purpose at that time, depending on what the chairman decides to do. I think we have flexibility. I don't think the timeline forces us into doing something today. And I guess I'm going to throw out to the chairman, I would certainly like to see what that formula does. And I would propose an amendment that we adopt that and have a committee report with both of those laid out to us before the board, and then we could determine which one of the two we want to adopt.
So you wanting, I mean, we have a motion and a second.
Right, and
to
I'm
approve,
making
so
an amendment to that motion that there be two pools of money and that the same formula be used for the 7 state colleges as they are for the 50 community colleges, but the funds be separated, retain the 95% floor for both, and we base it on historical funding of the combined funds. Right. And if you want to go back 3 biennia, that's fine. That's certainly what I would propose, is that you have some type of a level funding so you know what each of the 57 institutions brought to the table in the combination.
All right, so y'all would have to accept that, huh?
He needs a second.
Got to have a second.
Okay.
If not, we need to vote on the motion.
All right, so you have made a motion for the amendment, and we have no second for that at the moment? Okay. Then we will go ahead and vote on the motion as it is presented. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
No. Motion carries. All right. Thank you all very much. Okay, where am I? Item 5G is an update on the legislative priorities. John Wyatt, Director of External Relations, will provide an update.
Good morning. I know we're over time, so I will try to be very brief. As you know, the 84th Texas Legislature will convene a little over a month from today, and we're currently in the pre-filing period. So far, about 700 bills have been introduced between the two chambers, and in ER, External Relations, we've identified 54 of those as having a direct bearing on higher education. What I'd like to do is update you specifically on those bills that are relevant to your legislative recommendations that you adopted at the July board meeting. You may recall that there were 3 legislative recommendations in particular that you identified as your highest priority, your Tier 1 recommendations. The first recommendation was to support the passage of a tuition revenue bond authorization, TRBs. So far, 2 major bills have been introduced, both in the Senate, to authorize tuition revenue bonds at public institutions. Senator Zaffirini has introduced SB 21, which would authorize a total of 84 TRBs for an amount of $5.4 billion in bonding authority. And Senator Kel Seliger has introduced SB 150, which would authorize 64 TRBs, totaling about $2.8 billion in bonding authority. Our understanding of the difference between these 2 bills is that Senator Zaffarini's bill included all the TRB requests that institutions submitted in their LARs, and Senator Seliger limited the number and dollar amount of TRBs that he was including in his bill. So both of these bills have been introduced and will move forward in the process.
Can you give us those bill numbers again, please?
Certainly. Senator Zaffarini's bill is SB 21. And Senator Seliger's bill is SB 150.
115?
150.
Thank you.
In addition to those, there have also been some TRB bills introduced specific to institutions. There was a bill to authorize 1 TRB at UTEP, 2 TRBs at Texas Health Science Center. It's not uncommon for members to introduce bills specific to their districts for individual TRBs.
And were those already in the other 2?
I believe so. They were certainly in Senator Zaffarini's. I can't say for sure if they were in Senator Seliger's. The second major recommendation that the board had was to adopt a system of outcomes-based funding for universities. There has been a bill introduced by Senator Zaffarini. This is SB 22. And it would codify in statute an outcomes-based funding model for public universities. The model as proposed in the bill is substantially similar to the model that was developed by the Formula Advisory Committee and adopted by the board. However, there are some key differences between the 2. For instance, both models have 7 student success outcomes, and 4 of those are identical between the 2 models. those being total undergraduate degrees times graduation rate, undergraduate degrees per 100 full-time student equivalents, and undergraduate degrees to at-risk students. However, whereas the Formula Advisory Committee model includes metrics for completion of 30, 60, and 90 semester credit hours, Senator Zaffarini's bill would change those metrics to completion of 25%, 50%, and 75% of a student's degree requirements. Now, looking at a 120-hour degree, those would seem to be substantially similar. The difficulty we have here at the board is we don't collect data regarding which courses apply to a student's degree program. So we don't have a way here at the board to generate that information to run the model. We have communicated that concern to Senator Zaffarini's office, and we'll continue to work with her on that issue. Another difference between the two is that Senator Zaffarini's bill would have the coordinating board allocate the outcomes-based funding to the institutions, and it does not indicate what amount should be appropriated for that purpose. What the Formula Advisory Committee recommended and the board adopted was that $235 million in FY16 and 17 be appropriated directly to the institutions, and that would have to be done through the General Appropriations Act. So far, the draft GAA has not yet been introduced in either chamber, so we don't know whether that will be in the introduced bill. The third recommendation that the board had was to allow some community colleges to offer baccalaureate programs, specifically in the fields of nursing and applied sciences. No bill has yet been introduced to implement this. However, we have been communicating with Senator Rodney Ellis and Representative Sarah Davis, who you may recall sponsored SB 414, which required the board to look into this possibility last session. And those offices are currently working on legislation to implement this recommendation. We do expect that bills will be filed in the near future. And then finally, while not directly relevant to recommendations that you made, there have been several bills introduced that will be of interest to the board. Bills have been introduced that would eliminate the current statutory pathway that allows undocumented students to pay in-state tuition and to receive state financial aid. 3 bills have been introduced to establish a law school in the Rio Grande Valley. Legislation has been introduced that would require the coordinating board to create an intensive short orientation course for new regents at university systems and institutions. Legislation has been introduced that would officially create in statute the strategic fiscal review process. As you know, we are currently one of the pilot agencies undergoing the initial round of strategic fiscal review. So a bill's been introduced that would officially create that and tie it to the sunset review. And finally, legislation has been introduced that would require any agency undergoing sunset to submit a zero-based budget for the next biennium. So those are just a sampling of bills that might be of interest to the board, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, you mentioned something about an intensive training session for new regents. I thought we have new regent training at our annual meeting. We just had that, didn't we not?
We did, yes.
And this would specify certain elements that would have to be included in this training, and also that it would have to be available over the internet. So it would be a pre-created course that regents would have to take before they could assume their duties.
Whose bill is that?
Senator Zaffarini's, and it is SB 24.
So maybe our staff needs to visit with her staff and ask what elements of what we currently have what's missing?
Well, I think this is intended, first of all, to we do this training once a year. She wants something that could be done immediately.
Right, online?
Online.
Yeah.
And that it's not substantially different from what we already do. It simply just happens much more quickly.
Yeah. Is there anything that prevents us from going ahead and doing that now?
Well, I think obviously
other than resources.
The statute issue.
It's really limited. I mean, it means they have to do it a little sooner. They have to do it within a year. It adds FERPA training and a couple other things like this, and we could certainly add those things. We couldn't add the 1-year limitation. But the other things we could add if we were asked to. Right now, it's gotten more and more extensive, I have to say. And in the past, we used to have training for half a day and the rest of the conference for a full day. And now it's the training for a day and the rest of the conference half a day. And we've made some other adjustments. But I think the main thing staff sees is having to be done within a year. We already do make online training available.
And I'm wondering, what about the regions that never benefited from this training originally? Do we have continuing education for current regions?
We have had regions training for, I don't remember how, at least 15 years, thanks to Senator Parker, who created the original regions training, maybe 2 decades now. So there should not be any region that hasn't had this available to them at this point.
Any other questions, John? Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to agenda item 5H, which is adjournment. We have a motion? Second. All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.